Are we ready, Kevin?
Yeah, sure, rolling. Yeah.
Okay. So, Nick, we made a little bit of a film in 2010 on the anniversary of the 7/7 bombings, and it was the first time I met Dave Shaler. We met in a pub in King's Cross, and we went off to do some filming. We went up to Luton Station, and it was on the back of reading your book, really, because I met you a few years previous, I think, to that. And when I read Terror on the Tube, I thought it was absolutely brilliant, very, very powerful, and the information was very crucial in the respect that you proved that those trains didn't run. That train that those guys were meant to be on didn't run from Luton, did it?
Right, Mark. Yeah, we had that discussion a few years ago, and now we're coming up to the 10th anniversary, and the thing that always baffles me is, why are the people of London not bothered? You know, there's this massive attack, hundreds are injured, 50 are really, really killed in horror, and we get this daft story that people are given, manifestly impossible, about these alleged jihadi 4 lads. The inquest they give is a kind of monologue where no one's allowed to discuss it or disagree with it. I mean, I'm not aware of any shop in this country stocked my book. I mean, it did sell, as it sold, 1,000 copies or so. But why is this the only book in print on the subject? I just don't get it. I mean, 9/11, there are dozens of truth books, and so I did this. I've been sort of, you know, quite attacked and reviled for it, and I'm puzzled by the sheer level of apathy, and people seem to like this fictional concept of terrorists that they can sort of hate and fear, and is used to abolish our democratic freedoms. I feel confident, I don't know about you, Mark, that when we come up to this 10th anniversary, that there will not be discussion about the evidence and who did it and was it really Muslims. There will just be some wittering about terrorists. You know, I find this very puzzling that people don't want to, you know, really talk about the subject.
Well, I find that too, because when we went to make that film, when we went up to Luton Station, the points made within that film are extremely important and quite shocking to people, because there's clear evidence for what you and David Shaler are saying.
Yeah, I must say, Dave, with his MI5 background, is always worth listening to, and he makes these insightful comments about the way the police have not behaved properly looking for evidence and following up clues. Instead, they get a preset narrative, the war on terror, a preset announcement of who did it, and this isn't what the police used to do, is it?
No, that's right. I think you made that point at the time, that the police have taken on this role of giving you the story.
Yeah. And
I think that's a very important development since then, because what we get now is these PR people from the police. So you'll get some guy who's they really pick someone who's photogenic as this spokesman, and it's not often that someone who's top within the police. It's just a spokesman. So you get a spokesman giving you a story.
A story.
And a story is something that they've been given.
Yeah.
And what we've seen is that news is now PR.
Yeah. I mean, there was the famous Special Branch of Scotland Yard. For 100 years, it was renowned throughout the world. What happened after the London bombing? Oh, it was dissolved. It morphed into the Blairite Counter-Terror Command, which is an inherently absurd concept, if ever there was one, you know. Oh, they're looking for terror, and what do? They go and shoot de Menzies or something, so, as you say, they're given a story, and then what happens? Oh, journalists are leaked. They're leaked bits of the story that they have to believe. And, for example, the explosive use keeps changing, and it gets a bit sillier each time. I mean, it started with there was a relatively credible C4, which is really used for high-powered explosives, but the trouble is it's only made in NATO technical laboratories, okay? So had those lads got C4, that was what the real forensic experts said was probably present around those tube explosions. And when they decided, oh no, these guys up in Leeds, you know, homemade terrorists, then we had another absurd, we had a different explosive, what was it called? TP...
Well, it changed into what you called a bubbling liquid in the bath, basically.
Yeah.
It did morph, yes.
Yeah.
TTP was.
TTP, yeah. Well,
and
Black pepper and peroxide.
black pepper and peroxide.
hang on, that was the third one. TATP
TATP.
was this thing made with sulfuric acid, acetone, and hydrogen peroxide.
Yeah.
Peroxide is always there,
Yeah,
you know.
yeah.
It's always like a sort of comedy extra that it's going to be on the shelf. If somebody's arrested for being a terrorist, like Walthamstow, they arrested these guys in Walthamstow being terrorists, remember? And
Yeah.
they found bottles of hydrogen peroxide on the shelf, you know.
That's right.
It's kind of necessary extra.
Yeah.
Okay, so TATP is made in the bath, and because that has to be kept cool, these lads are alleged to have refrigerators in their backpacks, you know. So they bring this TATP down, and finally, after a few years, that fades out too.
Yes, that's right.
The police get tired of being asked where they got how they did this high-powered chemistry. I mean, those lads, frankly, wouldn't have recognised a bottle of peroxide if they were shown one. And where do they get it from? You need this high-purity peroxide. So none of the chemistry made sense at all. And so they finally get this totally absurd thing of black pepper and hydrogen peroxide. That was at the Kingston trial, you know. And they were supposed to get the knowledge of how to make this peroxide bomb from Pakistan. They're supposed to be jihad terror camps out in Pakistan where someone's giving them knowledge of how to mix pepper and... Now, I mean, if you look on the web, peroxide and black pepper, a bomb, you won't see any picture of anything going bang because it's really not going to happen, you know. And so the puzzle here is, why do British journalists go with it? Why do they accept this massive tearing apart of underground coaches, which really did happen?
Yeah.
That was done by black pepper and hydrogen peroxide, mixed up in a bath by some lads who didn't know about chemistry. Why is it? What is the mystery? And a roof is blown off a bus. Why does anyone believe the story of black pepper and peroxide that only turned up 3 years later? So we got a mystery of how this ever-changing story can just go on, and then at the inquest it just kind of faded away. They gave a lot of long monologues where nobody could... the inquest was divided so that no one could challenge the official narrative, which was just given in great detail. So it's puzzling that we haven't had any inquiry. British people probably think there have been some sort of inquiry. The various things dressed up to look like inquiries.
Absolutely correct, yeah. I mean, I think you made a really good point about journalism there, because there aren't any embedded journalists anymore. There's no investigative journalism going on. No. What people tend to do now is they go with PR stories they're given. If you look at any of these newspapers like the Metro, which was previously the Evening Standard, you'll find PR stories in there. And what's interesting is, for people like us, is that you can see what's behind the PR story, because you're being basically leaked some information about something that may happen, or the way policy of this government's going. So that's a very important point. The other thing is that the way journalists are being trained has changed. And this word change keeps coming up, and I cover this a lot on the show. Change agents. Now, change agents work in all sectors of society, and they're being used to enforce policy on the back of think tanks and things like the Tavistock Institute. It all comes down from these places, and that's very important, I think, because we're seeing a reframing of journalism. Now, how can you reframe the truth?
Yeah.
This is the whole deception, isn't it?
Yeah.
This is the whole kind of 1984 Brave New World stuff that people talk about, but it's actually being done because language has been reframed. They're now talking about journalism courses where the journalists are going to have different interpretations of real events. Now, wait a minute. It ties in to say let's tie this into something very, very simple. If you write a letter to a public body, they will often write back to you and say, "I'm sorry you feel this way." But what you've written to them is nothing about how you feel. You've given them some fact, and they turn it back on you as though it's something about the way you're feeling. And this is a big part of it.
Yeah. Well, so I'm wondering about a lot of Muslims around here where we live, Mark. Do you think there's any chance that British Muslims, I mean, there's 3 million of them in this country, is there any chance, I hope, that they might stop taking the blame? Because this whole war on terror farce works because Muslims collectively take the blame. I mean, I talk to Muslims and they realise that it never happens and that it's, all cooked up, but they won't raise their head above the parapet, and there's no collective way they will say, look, we didn't do it. When for the whole of this century, we've had Muslim terror fabricated events with horrific images of Muslims doing it, and that justifies armies being sent out to destroy Islamic nations and bomb them. And we're just, for God's sake, we're just starting to re-bomb Iraq again.
Yeah.
And that was very much the fake Charlie Hebdo event. Plus, in this country, the fake Drummer Lee Rigby event. Now, can we hope for a culture in which these things are deconstructed? All of these fake fabricated terrorists, they're all intelligence tests. That's the way given to the human race. Yeah. They're all like saying, are you really dumb enough to believe this? Because if you are, your life will get worse. It will get worse if you believe this. And we need some sort of journalist or media agent which had the intelligence to deconstruct these events. And so we may not know exactly who's done it, but we've got a general idea. Is the Zion Mafia, MI6, MI5, the CIA. It's the usual suspects. They brew it up. Yeah. They will do it up. And they will keep doing it. And maybe they quite enjoy doing it. The power, the control, the manipulation, and the drama of the event, the feeling of being an insider, the secret activity. I would guess it's all quite exciting.
I think that's filtering down, I think that's filtering down with this thing called like the 7-7 Brigade. But that's one of the British Army who are waging war on Facebook and Twitter. Now, that really...
Just explain that a bit more, Mark.
Yes, where there's a new anti-terror brigade called the 7-7 Brigade, the 77th Brigade.
Oh, right, yeah.
And they're going to be working out, I think, at Reading, from an army base.
Yeah.
And they're going to be soldiers, 1,500 soldiers, sat on Facebook all day. Well, that's not very healthy, is it? Aren't they meant to be out training?
Well, they'll probably be targeting us, Mark.
I know, but the point I think that's very important about this is if you're sitting on Facebook all day and you're attacking conspiracy theorists, then you might start looking into it and start thinking, wait a minute, I don't see how that is going to be an effective tool for stopping people putting information out. Because at the end of the day, when you've got empirical evidence of an event which you proved in your book, there's several points in there that can be put into an affidavit and put into a court of law, and that's to be rebutted. Every single point of that affidavit has to be rebutted. Everything, say on my website, windowsontheworld.net, is stuff that I would put in an affidavit. Because it's the truth. I don't put things out that aren't true. So what you get is this mentality of all this they seem to do is go for you personally. Like they did with you. They went for you personally. Now that is only effective up to a certain point. So what we're really dealing with here, as we know, is the military-industrial complex which runs the country. National security...
May we just add here, I quote Machiavelli, he said a prince should fear a standing army more than anything else, and that is your modern equivalent is what you've just said.
Yes.
That you've got this military-industrial complex which is so large and secret. That's the terrible thing.
Yes.
It has access to secrecy, so it can brew up theatre, brews up theatre, which ensures its own survival. And that theatre is state-fabricated terror. That is the story which we need to get some media outlet to start telling the British people. That they need to understand the story. And especially what we talked about on other occasions, Mark, the huge change that came around 2012 when actors came in. You get crisis actors doing it without any real blood. And that's an amazing change. I think it's an amazing change. Charlie Hebdo. Did anybody die? No. Drummer Lee Rigby. Any real deaths on that street? No. Sandy Hook. Did anybody really die? No. Loads of... Now, before that, what we're talking about now, the London bombings, that was real deaths and real blood. There were some actors, as we know. There was a terror drill going on at the time.
That's right.
Peter Powers and everything. There were actors, especially like Tavistock Square and stuff. But mainly, the deaths were real. And so that is a story of evolution of state-fabricated terror. That it's much cheaper if they can do it without real deaths, because they don't have real families liable to pursue them for the rest of their lives. And they don't have to have real post-mortems,
Well, this is the corporate nature of it now, isn't it? You're talking about corporate events. And that is very important, because if the state is run by corporations or is employing corporations to do these things, which the police are pretty much entirely corporate now. I cover that quite a lot on the show. For instance, a lot of people don't realise that British Transport Police were a private company. Now, let's just use them as an example.
Private company, right.
I'll just tell you why, because they're allowed...
Hang on, was that so back in 2005 when we had this
Yes,
event?
yeah, British Transport Police are a private company. They're based... Yes.
Yeah, private company. I think that's very important because just to remind ourselves, at the time, the Metropolitan Police, a lot of them had been seconded up to Scotland, hadn't they, with the big G8 summit that was going on, and that might have been part of the synchronised events to get the real police out of London.
Yeah.
And we had the British Transport Police looking after things, and as you said, they are a private company.
Yeah, they're funded by the railway companies. So what I think this was brought up in Parliament a few years ago, and it's an extremely important point, because if we're talking about privatisation of police forces and private security, now, who is indemnifying them to carry machine guns and sidearms? It's not the government, so who is it? Who's indemnifying them to stand on Liverpool Street Station with machine guns? There has to be indemnity insurance for those guys to be doing that.
Right.
And if it's not the Crown, who is it? And that is very important, because if those guys shoot somebody, who's accountable? Now, I cover this stuff on a kind of level where it's affecting people. And there was a case we dealt with British Transport Police, and that's resulting in some compensation now. But the reason I brought that up is because you've got armies of private security now, and we can see how this is being played out in America, okay? But it's also being played out here. And people don't realise that we don't really have a police force anymore in that respect, because this privatisation that's going on means that things that the police deal with are getting privatised around them, yeah? So the other thing that's changed, which is very important, is the way that people are treated now, obviously, because of the anti-terror laws. Now, they're using these anti-terror laws to basically demonise anybody who speaks out. But there's a problem with that.
And did that very much start with the London bombing?
With 2006 Terrorism Act.
Yeah.
That's where this thought crime stuff came in.
Yeah.
But really what they're doing there is saying it's for people who are inciting something to happen. Now, the police misinterpret that. Now, there are examples that I've seen of people who've been taken to court and they've brought this anti-terror laws in, but it always seems to fail because it's all about intent. Right? Now, what's the intent of the person? And it's called mensura in it's Latin word for basically guilty mind. Okay, so was there a guilty mind? And if we're talking the truth, there's no guilty mind, so there's no intent. So then what you're saying has to be disproven, and that takes us back to what we were talking about 5 minutes ago. But it's the general corruption of things that people rely on, like the police, that I think has been very key in the past 10 years. It's been eroded.
Oh yeah, absolutely right. Oh.
So, really, I think it's a double-edged thing. If people are armed with the truth and they're aware of their rights within the legal system that they're in, I think it's empowering. I think there is something encouraging that can come out of this, because if things are getting entirely corrupt, and I mean this has always been the case with police. I covered this a lot on the show on Windows on the World. But if you've got police going into court lying under oath, if you've got public servants going into court lying under oath, then we, the public, if we speak the truth, we expose the lies. And I think that's all we can do, really, because the rest of it's quite bleak, really, isn't it?
Well, these events were given so quickly, told who to hate and fear. Like with Charlie Hebdo, suddenly there's 1 million of these banners printed, and it's all ready, and they access the terrific deep emotions of oh no, we're being attacked, we protest, and so on. So they go straight to an emotional condition of rabble-raising the crowd and alleging a non-existent Islamic an enemy, and we've got to find a way of having a dialogue that doesn't get into those terrific negative emotions of hate and fear.
To remove the emotion from the equation.
Yeah.
Basically, it's not about how you feel about something, it's whether it happened.
Yeah.
That's all we're interested in.
Take the Charlie Hebdo thing. There was an office apparently blown up. We didn't see any dead bodies. We didn't see any blood. You just saw some stuff sort of blown about. Obviously, a bomb did go off, but there's no evidence that anybody died. There's no death certificates or anything. The clue we were given was the bit of street theatre where you saw people dressed up as police firing blanks, point blank range, apparently missing this guy. His brains didn't blow out. And then the next day there was blood on the pavement.
But that will never be tackled by mainstream television. They'll say, but surely these people whose relatives have died have suffered enough. That's what they'll say.
Well, they do.
They won't. They won't
always say that to you. Yeah. Haven't they had enough grief? Do you have to reopen these old wounds again?
Yes.
That's what they say.
It's not funny. It's pretty tragic. But this is really what we're talking about. It's people's inability to isolate an issue. That's all it is. If the issue can be isolated,
but we need the concept of how fabricated terror. It is theatre. I mean, say the Charlie Hebdo, right? All the street was blocked off for several hours. That was what witnesses said. But where that shooting happened, for instance, about 8 o'clock in the morning, and the thing was prepared for theatre, and in every way. Then there's some photographs from the roof showing people ready, and there was a camera, Israeli news for God's sake, up on the roof, all ready to photograph it when it happened. I mean, is that a clue? Is that a clue, or is it a clue?
Well, to me and you it is, but we're conspiracy theorists, aren't we?
So if we look at that and as how France has changed, it was a significant turning point for them, wasn't it?
Yeah, well, it enabled them to join NATO. They'd been making very independent comments, you see, of re-establishing good relations with Russia, this sort of thing, and of not accepting being controlled from America. They'd been making much too independent comments that could not be tolerated, okay? And so this event did turn it round, and next thing you know, the big French battleships are going off to start rebombing Iraq and Syria. So it was designed for a purpose, and it worked. It keeps working. The bloody thing keeps working. That's the nightmare we're in. So Drummer Lee Rigby, okay? All that street was cordoned off from about 8 o'clock in the morning, and you saw the whole drama take place without cars going by. I mean, when we went to see the next day, it was chock-a-block with cars all the time. So it's a theatre that goes on, various people standing around, hired actors, a bunch of actors up there sitting at the top of the road. Guy gets Photoshop blood on his hands. It's all cheap, corny theatre, and it's not that people can't see through it, it's that there's no radical media. I mean, if you think the last century, Mark, there used to be, the socialists and anarchists and communist newspapers were kind of anti-authority, weren't they? They'd print subversive stuff, wouldn't they? But now they won't touch it. They won't touch anything that might have an anti-Zionist agenda. Is that
well,
correct?
I think it's, yes, absolutely, but I think it's even deeper than that, because I covered a story about British Transport Police, and I brought them up before, but it's quite important in the respect that this story is horrendous, what's happened to this guy, okay? They arrived without a warrant. They forced entry. It's a story that's on windowsontheworld.net. It's not important to this particularly what we're saying, apart from the fact that the media, it was reported to the media, it was reported to the Sun newspaper and several other newspapers. The response that came back was, we cannot cover stories that involve the police.
Right.
Now, what is going on? Because the Romford Recorder up the road here, there's a young journalist got onto me who was very keen on the story, and she wanted all the information, but she obviously was told, we can't touch it. Why is that? Why are journalists being told that they can't cover stories by the police? It's up to them. Right. The police serve the public. The 9 principles of policing. Right?
Yeah.
If you look at the 9 principles of policing, it says the police are the public and the public are the police.
Does it?
Of course.
Yeah.
Because they're our public servants.
Well, the word polis means Greek city-state, which is your local community, the polis.
Yes.
So basically the police should be serving the local community.
Yes.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So if they're not serving the local community, who are they serving?
Yeah.
And that's the question that people should ask.
Police want to serve. They want to be liked. that they want to walk along the road and be respected, and have local respect. And my feeling is that they're upset. They get more and more now command orders from above, and more controlled by the state. And I would think they don't really like this so much. That they know that they're not in touch with the local community anymore.
No, and also since 2012 they've been driving around in armoured vehicles, basically riot vans. So there's big depots of riot vans all over London. I've driven past them sometimes late at night, driving through different parts of London. You'll see depots now. There's one just off the A406. It's probably always been there, but there's a lot of police vehicles there. There's riot vehicles there now. What we're finding...
Well, we're all fed with fear, aren't we, to justify this increased armament.
Yes, and it's very much part of it.
And I think our business is very much a show the Star Wars concept of the Phantom Menace. Now, that might not be much of a film, Mark, but I think the concept there is so important, the Phantom Menace. You're given the illusory hate image, and that justifies what you're talking about. These riot police, armed cars going all around the place.
Well, it's programming. It's basically like people get used to seeing that. If people's observations are lazy, which generally they are, and we can include ourselves in it, we all have gaps in our... basically the way we perceive things. Now, if you start introducing 2 to 3 police driving around in a riot van all day, go to the West End, sit in a cafe in Soho and see how many times that riot van goes round. It's going round and round.
Just remind us, how do we recognise the riot van?
Silver box vans or white vans with protected windscreens. They have the visor that goes up. And they hold about 21 police, I think. You see them. You only ever used to see those at demonstrations. You never saw them driving round town centres, which they are now. They drive around here all day.
We're sliding into a world with more and more fear, and that legitimises the security services. It legitimises more and more funding of the security services, and it legitimises more and more connection between the military and the police, which is exactly what you don't want in a normal civilised society. So it gets everybody more accepting the military being in control, which is the absolute antithesis of decent civilised life.
Yes, and we've seen this creeping in since 2005. It was quite slow at first, but it's the way that the police are now perceived and what the police are, what the police actually are as a body. Because on a tube train a few weeks ago, I saw an advertisement for RAF police. Now, not for the RAF.
RAF police?
Right, so, you join the army, be the best, all that sort of stuff. We know those posters, yeah? Now, that's okay. They're advertising for the army, right? That's just an advertisement for the army. Okay? Now, I saw an advertisement for RAF police. Now, the RAF aren't primarily a police force, are they?
Definitely not, no.
Okay,
no.
So why would the RAF be advertising for police? And there was something that was within that advertisement that was all about programming, in the respect that in the top right-hand corner there was a picture of a normal police car with guys with high-vis jackets, your normal police that you see, if that's the right word. Below that was a woman in a khaki baseball cap with MP across the top of it, in a soldier's uniform.
MP?
Yes, military police.
Oh, right.
Okay, so they're going military police wanted. Yeah. Now, I've never seen an advert like that before.
No. We haven't been told who military police are.
In the left-hand corner, there was a barbed wire and a kind of war situation. Now, what they're doing there is they're mixing up civil things, which is the police, civil matters, with military. And this is exactly what you were just saying. We're seeing a crossover. And this started to happen about 15 years ago, when traffic wardens became civil enforcement officers. Now, a civil enforcement officer can work on behalf of a court and kick your door in.
Goodness, really?
Okay, yes. And that's they use that on their paperwork for court fines. And what I'm noticing now is this mixing of civil and criminal. So, say you get stopped in your car and you haven't got an MOT, you get a fine, you'll get something pushed through your door that says warrant for your arrest. Now, they can't arrest you, but they're saying they can. But unless you know that, then they can. So basically...
I thought they just sent threats to come and take all your stuff away.
No, you're talking about bailiffs.
Bailiffs,
We deal with them too.
Isn't that what they do?
No, we're talking about something slightly different. Court fines, you see,
Well,
And
hang on.
no, hang on. I'll just get this in, Nick, because before I forget, the Domestic Violence and Crimes and Victims Act, yeah? A lot of these bailiffs companies are using it. These are special warrants to kick your door in if you don't comply with court fines. But these court fines are for criminal matters, yeah? Say you've vandalised somewhere and you get a fine. That's a criminal act, right? So if you don't pay that, they can authorise people to kick your door in, but for a civil debt they can't.
No.
But they're saying that they can. So everything's crossing over into this kind of belief that's being fed to the public that all these things are now the same. And that goes into how the police are perceived,
It does
and this
indeed, yeah.
military
Yeah.
aspect to it, and the private aspect.
Yeah, well, that's very alarming, Mark. But if we can come back to the general idea of a 10th anniversary,
Yes.
of what kind of way we can look forward to it. Over the years, Mark, we've been in a sort of 9/11 type truth movement, and I mean, we sort of enjoy talking about what exactly happened on 9/11, how many towers fell down, and what might have done it, you know. But most of the public don't. Okay, we have to face the strange fact that most of the public are not fascinated by the question of what exactly went into the Twin Towers, and did any of those were any of those 19 Muslims on the planes and stuff, which is that's the supreme event of this new millennium, okay? Which defines its whole direction with illusory terror. That is the defining thing of the new millennium. Okay, now, given that, and certainly there's virtually no politicians in Europe that are concerned to speak words of truth about 9/11, which is in itself extremely strange and kind of alarming. There's something a bit unreal about it. Okay, now I'm just wondering, the 10th anniversary, could there be a movement in Europe looking at the state-fabricated terror of different countries, trying to relate them together? For example, we've had our London bombing, and that Charlie Hebdo has quite a bit in common, and the Madrid bombing. The Madrid bombing and London bombing have more in common because there were real bloody deaths there,
Yes.
whereas the state-fabricated terror of Charlie Hebdo is more theatre, and you compare it perhaps more with the drummer Lee Rigby. And then there's another event, there's the shooting down of the MH17, which is of interest to people in Holland. That was state-fabricated terror. That was illusory terror made to look as if Russia had done it, made to justify this terrific new Russia's the enemy concept, trying to demonise Russia, which has been very successful, okay? Everyone now is talking about Russia as the enemy, and it's pretty obvious, I would say, that it was shot down by the two fighter planes in some sort of NATO terror drill, NATO-Ukraine terror drill, that shot it down.
Sounds like it,
and the big thing I'm not clear about is whether there were any real deaths. There were various corpses there that looked as if they'd been frozen and stiff for a long time and did not bleed, and were very soon quite smelly. So there's something very doubtful about that, and possible link with the other MH17 Malaysian plane shot down. But I'm just saying that there have been various different terror events in Europe now, starting off with Italy, of course, with the Great Gladio event.
Oh, yes.
That was the primal. Italy is the one country in Europe where the politicians have spoken words of truth about their Gladio event. They have had an investigation. They did ascertain that it was NATO elements that caused that bombing because they didn't want the commies to get into government.
Yeah.
So I'm just wondering, this might take a bit of funding, if there could be a liaison of different groups around Europe looking at state-fabricated terror and what is it doing to Europe. If we want culture in Europe to survive, can we collectively look at this state-fabricated terror? Is it the same people doing them all? Is it always the same bunch of people? You know, there's a lot in common with these different fabricated terror events, and the basic pattern of getting an illusory victim who then gets blamed and can normally then be attacked. I'm just wondering if we can develop a more European narrative.
Well, it sounds a great idea, but it brings us back to what this whole thing's about, is are the public interested? Are they interested enough? Because it appears from when we went back to look at Luton Station, there's some incredible information in that, because they've changed that station now.
They have, yeah.
And that was very, very important to the information you put out at the time, especially with the positioning of the bombers going into the state, the alleged bombers going into the station.
To reconstruct it, doesn't it?
Yes, but the thing is, that's had very few views. And if you look at anything on 7/7 on YouTube,
Yeah.
not many views at all.
that's
Not
strange.
many views. And
Strange, yeah.
it does seem to have been kind of forgotten.
Yeah. One person I know is, we both know, is Richard D. Hall of the Rich Planet, a very brave, paranormal stroke conspiracy theorist. And he practically lost his whole Sky TV slot because he said too much about it.
You said too much about it.
Well, I was on the programme, yeah.
Yeah.
And he nearly lost his Sky TV
Yeah.
slot. He got censored.
Yeah.
And the other radical alternative TV slots we know, like Media Edge, have gone. They were knocked out. They couldn't survive. So there's very little English, any sort of radical politics sites in England. Is that right? Apart from your good self, of course.
Well, thank you very much, Nick. But the thing is that I think it's really down to people and what they are willing to put in and look at, because all the information's there. All the information they need to know is on the internet.
Well, okay, yeah.
You're all right. We have to be quite, discriminatory about what we look at. But anybody who's got any kind of abilities to analyse an event can go and look at this stuff. But they're not doing it. And that takes us into, I think, what we were talking about with the media. Because if I switch on a television now and someone puts on BBC News, I either have to laugh or leave the room. And
Yeah, I know what you mean.
But how many people feel like that?
Well, Richard D. Hall did a survey and he found about what programmes depress you.
Yeah.
And I think he found that BBC News was the most depressing programme.
Well,
It's
it
quite
is, because
interesting.
it's got the most smug, ridiculous people presenting nonsense that they're reading off an auto cue.
Yes, yeah.
And they're so arrogant about it. It's absolutely ridiculous. But if we've got state-controlled TV, where you've got these people who are that smug, arrogant and stupid, then that's very bad news. That's very, literally, bad news, right?
Well, I
Now-
certainly won't ever go on a BBC programme again, I'll tell you that. I had enough with that 7/7 conspiracy.
Well, that was just terrible. I mean, they just use selective editing to make you look stupid, which is what they do.
Yeah.
They had an agenda, and of course...
And they did what they absolutely they swore to me they wouldn't do, and then they did it. You know.
And then the minor key voice comes in, but there's another thing you didn't know about Nick Kollerstrom. For God's sake. Yeah. I mean, no, it's absolutely vile. And these people are corrupt. They're absolutely corrupted individuals, and this is what I think comes down to, because when you allow
several other 7/7 programmes where I heard people who've been on them practically had their lives ruined. I mean, I'm very naive. I always tend to trust people.
Yes.
But I've had various times I've had people ring me up, ask, would you be on another TV programme? And people said to me, don't do it.
No.
Just don't.
You're
just
too
forget
honest, Nick.
about
You're
it.
too
Just
honest,
forget
because
about it.
you can't present yourself in a way where they're not going to stitch you up. You don't know the tricks. So some people do know those tricks, and they'll just keep talking,
Well, I
so
think
it can't
the
be re-edited.
TV realises there is a huge arena of people believe in so-called conspiracy theory, and want to talk about it. And they are forbidden by their controllers from discussing it. So the only way they can discuss it is by looking at the whole so-called conspiracy theory, i.e. the truth of what happened, and then at the end dismissing it. That's the only terms in which they're allowed to discuss the matter. And you can very occasionally get a Daily Mail type article on this. It would describe theories about 9/11 and then say, of course, something happened, and that is about the nearest they can go. There's only one newspaper, say the last 5 years, I can think of that would talk about state fabricated terror at all, and that was one called the Sovereign Independent, which I think disappeared quite a while back,
Yes,
or
that's
might
right,
just be virtual or something, and it's a bit Irish, wasn't it?
Yes, originally it was an Irish publication, I think.
I think I just want to mention. I think it came out. Was it monthly or something? It managed to come out. And that would try to, but otherwise, even something like UK Column, right? That's supposed to be radical, alternative. I don't know, pro-British and whatever. It would never do anything on state fabricated terror, even that. Okay, that's what I noticed. For example, I had a big article about this guy Muad'Dib and him being in jail and everything. and was he a bit of a hero or something? So I had a big page about Mudib, but it would not in any way commit itself to whether what he said was true. Like the whole point was his video is about what happened on the London bombing,
Yeah.
the ripple effect. It would not comment on that, you know. And I thought, well, what's going on here?
Well, I think this there is a problem when you get organisations, yeah, because we know this because organisations that we've been part of or organised groups we've been part of heavily infiltrated.
Yeah.
So we've got a society now of it's kind of the way things have actually changed, because this is the word they use, changed all the time.
Yeah.
It's quite radical, because what you've got now, as I think we reiterating really what we said earlier, is that they've got this huge public sector which includes the police and the government who lie all the time.
Yeah.
And that cannot be in any way healthy for the population of the country, because when this fans out and you're starting to get this infiltration of groups all comes into it, yeah. So basically, I think people have to speak their own truth, do their own research. The thing is, the reason that this stuff keeps happening is people let it happen, right?
Yeah.
They let it happen, and a lot of this. The whole lesson about this, I think, is about empowerment, self-empowerment, and it takes you down a journey of where you go, am I going to tell the truth, or am I going to compromise myself?
Yeah, I
the
think,
time.
Yeah, with police,
Yeah.
as I see it, the problem is that they've no longer got a realistic or sensible definition of crime.
Correct.
Which they used to have, and we all used to know what a crime was, and it's pretty straightforward. You know, it's unacceptable harm or loss. If you cause somebody that, that is a crime, and we all used to know what the word meant. And now they're able to arrest you if you think they might be intending to do something, or if you fit their terror profile.
That's right.
You know, i.e. you're a Muslim with a beard, and you might be intending to do something.
Yes, but what does a terrorist look like, sir?
Well, there you go. Right.
Yeah, there you go.
I just put in there, you know, Cameron's speech. I don't know if you saw that, where we've all been reclassified as non-violent extremists.
Yeah, right.
What about that?
Yeah, well, I went and gave myself up, didn't I?
Well,
yeah, okay, let's talk about that.
Okay?
Yeah, because you're rambling on a bit.
Yeah,
you can
let's
cut it
just
there,
mention
can't
that. Yeah, yeah.
Okay, so, all right, fire away. So,
Okay.
At leisure.
Okay, so with this new, all these new anti-terror laws, which are quite superfluous and unnecessary, they give the police more and more an orientation that they're supposed to hunt for terror. Now, what the hell does that mean? Well, broadly speaking, it means arresting loads of innocent Muslims, but Cameron has now gone further, and he's now at the United Nations calling for a lack of tolerance towards what he called non-violent extremists. Now, that is pretty soon going to involve us, anyone with a dissident narrative, a so-called truth group, and he specified what he meant. He said anyone who has funny theories about 9/11 thinks the Jews did it. That's more. I think that's what he said.
Yeah, he said this is a Jewish plot.
Let me just pause that. Right, BT rolling, 3, 2, 1, when ready.
Okay, well, a few months ago, Cameron at the United Nations defined non-violent extremism, and he had two aspects to it, what we should not tolerate. One was the idea that government complicity in the London bombing is explicitly stated, and the other was Jewish Jews having done 9/11, broadly speaking.
Well, I think he said that conspiracy theorists who say that 9/11 was a Jewish plot.
Exactly, yeah.
I think that's what he said verbatim.
Now, I then went up to Scotland Yard. I wrote to the head of Scotland Yard. I said I was going to come and give myself up, and I did, and it was very decent. The sergeant there came out, and he said he couldn't accept my book. So he was interacting with me, and he did do a dialogue outside Scotland Yard, which I think was very respectful. He needn't have done, and I think we got across the inherent absurdity, the idea of non-violent extremism. I said I was extremely angry at my country bombing other nations, so I was an extremist, and I was committed to non-violence, and therefore I thought he ought to arrest me, and he refused to do so, obviously. I think that was a good political action, you know.
It was very simple and very direct, and it proved a point.
Yeah, but we do need to emphasise in friendly dialogue with the police that Magna Carta does say rulers of this land have to know the laws well, and these laws do not actually involve thought crime. We do not accept living in a land where the police are going to arrest people because of what they think they might be intending to do, or because they might be believing the wrong thing. We absolutely do not accept that. And we want a sensible, realistic definition of crime as the basis for justice. Civilization cannot survive without justice, and we need a proper, sensible definition of crime that we agree on. We all have to agree on what a crime is, and that it's something bad, and we're grateful for the police to stopping it. We need that very simple logic to be in place, and that does not include the police arresting you because David Cameron thinks you might be extremist.
I think it goes down to the system as well, because even though the system is draconian and problematic, the whole of the Roman law system, within that there are always remedies. Once they start taking the remedies out, then there's no rule of law. So if there's no rule of law, then they have a problem, because what they're doing by all this thought crime stuff is removing remedy, and the problem they've got there is that whenever I've seen them use this, it falls apart, because when it's put in front of a judge, it's like, what do you mean? It's about intent. It comes back to what we were talking about. Whether there's intent to do something.
Yeah.
Now, intent has to be proven. You can't just say, I think you're intending to do something. Intent has to be proven in court.
Should be, yeah.
Has to
So
be.
do you think what people call conspiracy theories, what we'd say, having public discussions about what happened, can the government legislate to stop that? I mean, is Ofcom, are they going to close down programmes that give these what Cameron says are unacceptable discourse?
In a way, does that matter about mainstream television? Because mainstream television doesn't report any of the stuff that we're interested in anyway.
No, it doesn't.
Okay?
No.
So I think we can dismiss that in the respect that Ofcom is there to regulate mainstream broadcasters. Okay? So, I mean, I watch Press TV, which was taken off by Ofcom.
Yeah, right.
So I
Outrageous.
don't watch anything that's Ofcom regulated.
Yeah, I mean, we could just throw in that Russia Today had to scramble to avoid the similar fate, and what they did, they set up an office in London. That was what they had to do. And I think it's rather dismal. It's taken the fun out. RT used to be a lot of fun to watch, and now it's so monitored to fit the Ofcom regulations now. I think it's slightly spoilt it, you know.
Yeah, I think it depends on, how we're going to do it, because I just see the putting stuff out on the internet. I mean, the people have to decide what they want, I think, because this regulation, this over-regulation of everything, I don't think it can work, because who's going to enforce it all? How's it going to be enforced? It's like getting back to what happened with you. I'm handing myself in as a domestic terrorist. The guy wouldn't know what to do. So what are you talking about? It's just ridiculous. So I don't know that is going to affect us any more than it does already. Particular thing.
So if pause there. Okay, so we're on 3, 2, 1.
Yeah, you see, the London bombings, they tried to blame it on Al Qaeda. That was the general bogeyman, right? But they weren't sure about it, because the four lads obviously had no interest in politics, whatever, as far as anyone could tell. But Al Qaeda has been the general bogeyman. Now, with Syria, that fell apart because Al Qaeda was apparently fighting on the same side as the US Marines, and you had US Marines rebelling, saying, I won't fight on the same side as Al Qaeda. So the whole narrative of Al Qaeda fell apart at that point, and they had to get a new bogeyman. So we suddenly got this funny ISIS thing, and nobody's quite sure who they are, but they're the new bogeyman. And to establish ISIS, then, who are the public going to fear, hate and fear? Public have to hate and fear somebody, preferably darker skin colour. So to establish that, we get these beheading videos, right? Now, these might have been filmed somewhere in the back of Aldershot or whatever. There's a rubber knife, and you see, was it a guy with a British accent is standing there and apparently executing a guy with an American accent.
Jeddy John.
And Jeddy John. And this shows why we have to bomb Syria, and so on. And then there's no blood comes out. You see the rubber knife, and then there's a bit of ketchup with a body you're shown. And apparently there's a sequence of these, and they're very much connected with a particular website, Rita Katz, a well-known Zionist, who produced some of the old bin Laden videos. Apparently they tend to come from that site. And what amazed me was the way the whole House of Commons, I watched this House of Commons debate, all these people with upper crust accents and, shirts, smart shirts, with suits, talking about why we have to rebomb Iraq. I mean, wasn't that enough what we did to Iraq, for God's sake? We pulverised the whole country. Oh no, they want to go back and rebomb Iraq. And apparently these crappy beheading videos are the reason. And I'm wondering, how can fabricated terror be as cheap as this? I mean, that they must have cost just a few £100 to produce.
Well, some of them are quite well directed. The one I saw was quite slick, but you actually see the beheading. But the camera angles were quite good on that one.
Was it? Right.
Yeah, but I mean,
Wasn't that another point? People said, would you have such good camera angles if it was a real execution?
I mean, some of the stills are great as well, because you've got shadows from the soldiers, but no shadows from the victims. And stuff
that's
like
another
that.
thing. Yeah, the shadows are missing.
And where they're walking along the seashore on a beautiful beach, with they're dragging these poor guys along in their orange Guantanamo type dungarees outfits,
All right.
and they've got their headgear on, their ISIS headgear, so you can't see them in their masks, looking very menacing. But there's no footprints, and it's like
no footprints.
on the beach.
Missed out the footprints.
Yeah. It's very shoddy. And yes, your point is very good in that. Can't they see through this? And that's very worrying.
Well, they must, surely. Surely the whole House of Commons can't all be taken in by... I'm sure they've got advisors, intelligence advisors, telling them who made these videos and stuff.
Yeah, but I mean, look at what you get on, say, Sky News or something. You get the intelligence expert. It's like the expert witness who comes in.
Right.
He's spent a few years in the army. He's decided to go into PR.
Yeah.
This is what happens, though, isn't it?
Right.
We've just been fed illusion all the time.
Yeah.
But the problem we've got is the MPs. People don't realise their MPs don't work for them. They can't work for them. Mm-hmm. They can play around with side issues. They're allowed to do that. They're allowed to look like they've got a local victory.
Yeah.
Like, maybe they've opened a community centre, probably full of change agents.
Right.
But they can't do anything. And this is what I find very strange about it. Haven't people cottoned onto that now? They fall for the same thing every day of their lives and don't realise that nothing's changing.
Well, I've been baffled talking to various intelligent friends of mine that they believe these beheading videos, and is there just a sort of clique of us conspiracy theorists who kind of deconstructs them, or is there no national media that would deconstruct these and say...
Well, I would say there's a few analytical minds who've deconstructed them, Nick.
Yeah, analytical minds. All right. I mean, the first time I noticed real digital... sorry, I changed that. Real digital faking on a British paper, Evening Standard, was when they pulled down that statue of Saddam Hussein in Baghdad. I don't know if you remember that.
That's right. We talked about that the other night.
They wanted cheering crowds as they were pulling down this, and they couldn't find any. There were no cheering crowds.
There's no one there, really, was
absolutely no. There was no one there, except a bunch of hired sort of thugs that had been flown in especially, and they were put there, and there were just a few of them. And they duplicated with digital fabrication.
Yeah.
They duplicated that to make it look like a big crowd, and that then got on the Evening Standard, a big cheering crowd, as Saddam Hussein's statue was pulled down. And if you look carefully, you could see the duplications.
What about I know we've jumped past it, but Charlie Hebdo. Did you see the photo of the leaders when they were more or less linking arms?
Yeah,
and you allegedly do marching down a big
That's
street.
right,
Did you see the photograph where it was just a few of them at the front?
Yes, that's right.
And it was triangulated so it would look. It was a triangle.
Oh, that's brilliant. That's brilliant.
Have you seen that?
No, I haven't actually. But you tell me about it. Let's continue. Mark, you've seen it, haven't you?
Yes, I've seen that.
Yeah. You tell me about it. Let's continue with you telling me about it. So
Well, let's have a look at it before we carry on.
So Russia Today, basically, I'll cut this in if you want to. Russia Today was the only channel that said, but if you look from another angle, and there's no one on the streets are completely empty, they've blocked them off.
Right.
And they're just
that's brilliant. That's brilliant. That'd be a good climax. That's the end. Right. Let's end on that. Let's end on that. Yeah. Just yeah. Okay.
Okay.
So there was a photograph taken from the back of this operation, putting down the Saddam Hussein, and you could see there were just a few people there, you know, but that didn't get onto the British media. And I guess that's rather like what we had more recently with the Charlie Hebdo event, with all the world leaders marching along the road.
Linking arms, yeah.
Do you remember that one, Mark?
Yes, I do. And that's been kind of debunked as well, hasn't it, really?
Well, it looked like there was a huge crowd behind them, didn't it, all
exactly.
marching along. and what was there really then?
Well, I think it was just them, wasn't it?
Just them?
Yeah, but how many of them were really there, we don't know, do we?
Well, Netanyahu, he wasn't invited, that's for sure. He barged
Doesn't mean he's not going to turn up, though, does it?
Barged his way. I think they specifically asked him not to come. He barged his way to the front. Yeah. So again, it was just a small, as Russia today pointed out, it was just a small crowd of these world leaders, small bunch of with a huge, massive crowd digitally enhanced behind them,
I think, though, that's again the point we were making earlier on, because I believe now that there are people who work in media who think that's acceptable. Because it's the way they've been trained by things like media studies.
Yeah.
The whole way news is reported has been blurred into an unreality. And that's why we can get these ISIS videos. That's why we can get this photoshopped stuff. Because I don't even think it's intelligence people doing it anymore. It's just normal people who are working on basically on magazines and within news. Because you've just got, my job's to Photoshop this, and they'll just see it as a job. And I think that.
Well, can you imagine any alternative media that would, as a normal kind of way, describe this and tell people about it? I mean, we do need to be informed. I mean, you and I, we haven't got regular jobs. We've got time to surf the web and find this stuff.
Don't tell them that.
But well, I think there's a terrific cultural divide here. That people who tend to be in the truth movement have got the time to surf the web. And people who are employed do the 9 to 5 and they're married and they've got a family, they read the paper, they watch the news, they haven't got time to look for all this stuff.
That's kind of, in a way, a bit of an excuse, I think, because you can make time for this stuff. I mean, the point of that is that, my work's diminished. My work's diminished because the economy's diminished, right? And that's a lot of people in that situation now. There's a lot of people who don't have full-time employment, and that is part of the plans, because they don't want people to be able to afford to stay ahead. Basically, the whole thing is to increase debt. Increase debt, and then you obviously
that makes you docile.
Absolutely, that's what it's all about. It's just to beat down the public, really, and so. Really, the way that this whole kind of discussion's gone is we're asking, really, why the public can't see through this and why they're not bothered.
Yeah.
And only the public can answer. Because what I find is I'll go on about this stuff to people and they'll get it to a certain extent, but they don't make it part of their worldview. And that is the important thing. They go back to their television, their computer games, their nonsense, because that's where they're comfortable. And the system exists because of that mentality. There's something inherent in human beings that they like to be led, and they're lazy.
How strange. So do we live in a civilization that is based on a fabricated illusion that ratifies war? Is that at the core of the society that we're living in?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And cannot any media exist and function that don't accept this narrative? Well,
only the alternative media, or the so-called alternative media.
Yeah, well, it doesn't seem to have faded away. I mean, I always thought there was radical socialist newspapers or communist or whatever that would want to undermine the state narrative and would therefore publish this kind of stuff, but they don't.
No, because all of those groups will have been co-opted into and taken over.
Well, how did that happen?
How did it happen?
Yeah.
How do you infiltrate a group, you mean?
No, I mean, how come all the radical, these angry young communists, anarchists and socialists are not prepared to go with this narrative that deconstructs state power?
Well, I think it's about the way that the agenda has been
We all
led
used to believe
against
Noam Chomsky. Do you remember we used to read those huge books he published? And that was radical socialism. You know, everyone used to... He was like the conscience of the left wing. And now in this 21st century, he's somehow kind of lost the plot. He endorses the state view of 9/11. And he totally endorses, maybe it's just because he's too old, you know, the view that Muslims did all these things. So that's a kind of emblem, an indication of the left wing losing its way.
2 minutes to take the...
Yeah, I think that really the left and right thing, what they call the left-right paradigm, as we know, doesn't really exist anymore. Because what we have is an agenda. We have an agenda.
Right.
We're owned by offshore interests. David Cameron doesn't work for this country. He's not funded by this country. How can he work for this country?
Oh, shucks. Who's he working for then, Mark?
Well, look who's funding...
Tel Aviv.
Look who's funding the Conservative Party.
Well, right. Yeah, so no more.
Just look who funds the Conservative Party, and you can find it online.
Yeah.
And that's one thing that we don't have to tell people out there. Just go and look and do your own research.
Yeah.
Yeah? And that will tell you why Cameron is there. And we now have a situation where all major protests are organised by the government. I've looked into this. Yeah?
Goodness
all
gracious.
groups are controlled.
Goodness gracious.
And it's big business. The military-industrial complex, as it was called in the 50s, is a reality. But what you've got is G4S, Serco, but they're just the ones that are mentioned. There's so many private interests in this now.
Yeah, anyway, Mark, let's just express the hope that as this 10th anniversary comes up, we will resist, and there will be young women and men of vision who will say, that's not the way it's got to be.
Well, what is encouraging, I talk to a lot of younger people, especially around here in East London, and a lot of them are very switched on. Of course, you've got people walking around like zombies, right?
Yeah.
And the zombies are increasing, but there are young people out there, and a lot round here who know what's going on. They're using the internet for what it's for. They understand the political game that's being played, but if they don't do anything about it within their own lives, then they're contributing to it. So that's the main thing, is that it has to come from yourself individually.
Yeah. Okay, well, on that note,